Have you ever looked at a lonely stone and felt it remembering something older than us? Welcome to Unearthed Secrets, where storms, tides, winds, and mountains carve their own quiet stories. Before we begin, please like, subscribe, and share where in the world you're watching from. The Idol, carved by storms. Along the rugged coastline of Big Sur, where cliffs plunge sharply into waves that have crossed entire oceans, there stands a formation of stone so weathered, so sculpted by wind and tide, that it feels less like a natural feature and more like something the earth carved deliberately. The Pacific crashes against these shores with a sound that never sleeps, a rhythm of roaring water, retreating foam, and the distant pull of unseen currents. Salt hangs in the air like a fine mist. Kelp drifts in slow spirals. The sky stretches open, shifting from pale grey to burnished gold as the sun moves toward the horizon. In the middle of this restless world rises a great stone arch, massive, rooted, shaped like the doorway of a forgotten temple. Its opening glows at certain times of day, drawing light and sea together into a single glowing passage. Its sides bear the scars of storms, long vertical tiers, smooth polished plains and craggy ridges battered by wind. The stone is rough, dark in some places, golden in others, streaked with mineral veins that shimmer in the sun. This is Pfeiffer Rock Arch, an idol carved not by human hands, but by storms, centuries, and the relentless patience of the sea. To stand before it is to feel the tension between endurance and erosion, a monument rising from chaos, a sculpture shaped by waves that never stop arriving. From the beach, the arch appears immense, almost too large for the cove that holds it. The hole in its centre frames the horizon like a window set into a colossal wall. At high tide, waves surge through the opening, illuminated by the shifting light. At low tide, the base emerges, wet stone glistening under the sun. The arch is never silent. Even on calm days, the ocean murmurs around it. Even at night, waves slip through its base with soft breaths. Even at dawn, the wind gathers at its edges, whispering along the cracks. When you walk toward it, your footsteps sink slightly into the wet sand. Sea foam trails across the beach in delicate lace-like patterns. The air is alive with the cry of gulls, the crash of surf, and the deep resonance of the ocean moving among hidden rocks. The closer you come, the more massive the structure becomes. The arch rises like the ruin of a colossal doorway, its pillars uneven, its crown jagged, its silhouette cut sharply against the sky. The central opening is tall enough for waves to pass through effortlessly, waves that carry light with them. That light is what makes the arch an idol. Twice each winter, when the sun sets at the precise angle, the rays pass directly through the arch. The opening becomes a golden tunnel, glowing so intensely it seems to burn from within. Photographers gather on the beach to capture those moments, but even without a camera, the sight feels transcendent. The stone glows, the water glows, the very air glows. For a brief time, the arch becomes a frame for the setting sun, a convergence of elements too, perfect to be accidental. But long before cameras, long before roads reached this coastline, long before travellers named it or mapped it, the arch stood here, silent, massive, shaped by forces older than stories. Local legends say the formation was once part of a solid cliff. Waves carved the opening over centuries, gnawing at the weaker rock, hollowing a tunnel that grew wider and wider. Storms came ashore with ferocity, breaking pieces away, sculpting new shapes. Wind carried grains of sand that etched the surface. Rain slid down its sides, carving channels and depressions. Storm after storm, tide after tide, the earth sculpted its own idol. Standing on the beach, you can watch the ocean use the arch as though interacting with it. Waves strike the outside of the rock with thunderous force, then pull inward through the arch's heart, creating a sound that echoes between stone walls. Water shoots through the opening like breath through the mouth of a giant. At high tide, the sound becomes deeper, richer, almost musical, a resonant throat singing of the sea. When storms approach, the arch transforms. Clouds gather over the water, winds increase, throwing spray across the beach. Waves grow taller, darker, and more unpredictable. The arch stands firm. It has withstood storms that toppled cliffs. It has endured earthquakes. It has survived the relentless grinding of the Pacific. During the fiercest tempests, the arch becomes an entity alive in motion. Water blasts through the opening in white explosions. Foam bursts upward in plumes. Spray flies from the upper ledges like steam. The entire formation trembles under the impact, yet remains. People watching from the beach describe a feeling of awe mixed with unease, the sense of witnessing something powerful, elemental, and wild. The arch is not merely part of the landscape, it is a participant in the storm, a figure standing against the onslaught. The idol carved by storms does not resist the sea. It embraces it, accepts it, allows itself to be shaped by it. Over centuries, this acceptance has made it the icon it is today. At low tide, the rocks around the arch reveal tide pools filled with small sea anemones, tiny crabs, starfish clinging to stone, and kelp waving gently beneath the surface. The water is clear, cold, and tinged with the colours of minerals swirling beneath the rocks. Children and travellers wander the shoreline, stepping carefully between pools, discovering miniature worlds reflecting the vast ocean beyond. From close beneath the arch, the stone's texture becomes more complex. There are polished sections where waves have carved smooth curves. There are rough ridges where storms broke off chunks of rock. There are vertical fissures running along the pillars like ancient scars. Placing your hand on the stone, you feel the cold of the sea stored within it. The surface is damp, gritty with salt, and alive with whispers of past storms. Looking upward, you see the arch's upper edge, jagged, uneven, shaped like the spine of a petrified beast. Birds sometimes perch there, watching the waves with bright, alert eyes. Sea spray darkens their feathers. Their calls echo across the cove. The beach at Pfeiffer is unique, its sand often tinted purple by manganese garnet washed down from the cliffs. When the light strikes it just right, streaks of lavender and violet shimmer across the shoreline, like pigments spilled from a painter's palette. The arch rises from this purple sand like something mythical, a titan's gate, a weathered idol, a sentinel formed from fire and water. At sunset the air cools, shadows lengthen across the beach, the waves soften for a moment before the tide changes. The sky reddens along the horizon. The arch's silhouette becomes sharper, darker, more defined. It stands as a black shape cut into a sky of molten colours, orange, pink, gold, and violet. As the sun lowers, waves catch its light and throw it against the stone. The water inside the arch glitters. The opening begins to glow. Soon the entire passageway becomes a beam of light. Visitors gasp. Photographers click. Some simply stand still, unable to speak. The light seems alive, flickering, pulsing, dancing with the motion of the sea. It pours through the arch like a river of fire. Spray explodes from the opening, catching the sun in thousands of glowing droplets. The entire arch ignites in reflected radiance. The idol, carved by storms, becomes a doorway into the sun. For those few minutes, the world feels suspended. Time softens, sound fades, the sea becomes choreography, the stone becomes shrine, the light becomes sacred, and then the sun sinks lower. The angle shifts, the glow dims, darkness spreads like ink across the ocean. The arch recedes into shadow. Its details blur, its presence softens, the day releases it. Night along this coast is colder than many expect. The wind sharpens, fog gathers in strands that drift across the water. Stars appear dimly through the marine haze. In that dimness, the arch becomes a silhouette marked only by the sound of waves striking its base. The opening becomes a void, a black shape within a darker shape. You cannot see the water rushing through it, but you hear it, a rhythm, a breathing, a slow conversation between sea and stone. Some describe the sound as a voice, not of a creature, but of the ocean itself. A low hum, a resonant sigh, a reminder of the earth's oldest language. There are times when the fog grows so thick that the arch vanishes entirely. One moment it stands before you, the next it dissolves into white vapour. The sound remains, but the shape is gone. The waves speak, but the idol stays hidden. The ocean moves, but the stone withdraws. As dawn approaches, the fog begins to thin. The first colours of morning creep across the sky. Pale blues, gentle pinks, the soft silver of early light. The arch reappears slowly, as though rising from the sea rather than being revealed by the sun. At this hour, the beach is quiet. Only the waves move, only the gulls circle, only the wind shifts gently. The arch stands with its worn arches, its storm-swept pillars, its timeless silhouette, unchanged, unmoved, unbent by the night. The first rays of morning touch its upper edges, highlighting the textures carved by centuries of wind and salt. Shadows shift along the stone, revealing patterns and ridges hidden in the dark. The idol, carved by storms, greets the day not with brilliance but with quiet endurance, because that is its true strength. Not the light it captures, not the storms it withstands, not the awe it inspires, but the patience with which it accepts transformation. Every tide shapes it, every wave leaves its mark, every storm takes a little, every calm day gives a little back. It stands because it yields, it survives because it listens, it endures because it understands the ocean in a way humans never can. Not as an enemy, not as a sculptor, but as a companion in the long story of time. When you finally turn to leave the beach, climbing the sandy path back toward the cliffs, you look back one last time. The arch stands as it always has, a dark, monumental figure framed by the endless ocean. The waves continue their steady rhythm. The wind continues its quiet song. The sun continues its slow rise. And the stone, carved by storms and shaped by centuries, remains. A witness, a monument, a threshold, a memory of earth and sea entwined. The idol carved by storms waits for the next tide, as it has forever, and as it will for as long as the ocean breathes. The rock that watches the tides. In the calm turquoise waters of Pangar Bay, where limestone cliffs rise like weathered guardians from the sea and mangroves weave their roots into the tidal mud, there stands a stone tower so improbable, so slender, so precariously balanced that it looks as though the ocean itself must be holding it upright. Boats drift softly around it, waves lap gently at its base, light ripples across its surface in shades of jade, emerald and silver, and there, rising more than 20 metres straight out of the sea, is Kotapu, the rock that watches the tides. To those who see it for the first time, Kotapu appears like a monument made by the sea, a stone column lifted from the underwater earth and left to stand alone in the open bay. Its shape narrows at the base, widening upward like a reversed spearhead. The lower portion looks impossibly thin compared to the heavy crown of stone above it, a crown decorated with rough spires and small shrubs that cling stubbornly to cracks carved by wind and salt. The rock feels alive, not in motion, but in presence, as though it has been waiting quietly for centuries, observing the rhythm of the tides, watching boats come and go, watching storms gather and dissolve, watching the sun rise and fall in 1,000 different colours. For even from a distance, Kotapu looks like a sentinel. The water around it reflects the sky like polished glass when the sea is calm, but beneath that surface lies a world constantly in motion, shifting sediments, slow currents, rising and falling tides that change the shape of the shore every day. Kotapu stands in the middle of this fluid world as the one thing the ocean has not carried away. A solitary figure, rising amid the endlessly moving water. Approaching the rock by boat, its scale becomes more striking. What from afar looks small and delicate now rises high, its weathered textures visible even from a distance of several metres. Cracks run along its surface in vertical streaks, like the scars of ancient pressure. Horizontal lines reveal layers formed millions of years ago when this entire region lay beneath the sea. Overhangs and ridges cast sharp shadows, giving the stone the appearance of an old, thoughtful face. The water at the base is shallow in places, deep in others. At low tide, sandbars appear like fleeting pathways. At high tide, the sea swallows them, turning the landscape into a wide lagoon of shifting colour. The tides shape everything in this bay. The roots of the mangroves, the life of the corals, the paths of fishermen, the rhythm of the waves. But they never shape Kotapu into anything other than itself. It stands, as it always has, watching. Legends about the rock are numerous, and each tells a different story about how it came to be. One tale speaks of a fisherman who cast his spear into the water. When he pulled it back, the metal had transformed into stone. Furious, he threw it into the sea, where it rose into the column that stands today. Another tale speaks of giants, another of deities, another of tragedies. But beyond stories, Kotapu is a geological marvel born of processes that unfolded slowly, impossibly slowly, across ages of rain, wind, tide, and earth movement. It may once have been part of a larger cliff. The ocean likely carved a crack, widened it, then widened it again. Eventually, everything around the stone collapsed into the sea, leaving this single column balanced on a narrow base. Over thousands of years, erosion smoothed and shaped it further, giving it its iconic shape. From up close, the details become mesmerising. There are pockets in the stone where birds nest. Small shrubs grow in places where barely any soil exists. Salt deposits form delicate patterns along certain surfaces. Crabs cling to the lower cracks when the tide is high. Barnacles cluster in hidden crevices. and in the calmer waters near the base, tiny fish flash in and out of sunlight. Standing in a boat near the rock, waves gently rocking beneath you, the presence of Kotapu becomes overwhelming. It rises so sharply from the water, so out of proportion to its surroundings, that it feels like something the sea is protecting rather than eroding. Its shadow lies long across the water during early morning and late afternoon. The reflection trembles slightly in the waves, light curves around its edges, creating halos of brightness, and when the sun hits the upper ridges, the top of the stone glows a warm golden brown. But the tides are its true companions. Twice a day, the water rises, swallowing parts of the rock's base. Twice a day, the water falls, exposing hidden crevices. With every tide, the world around Kotapu changes, but the rock remains unchanged. At low tide, the sea is calm and shallow. Boats can approach closely. The water turns a soft green, and the seafloor becomes visible like a map etched beneath the waves. Kotapu appears taller at low tide, its full height emerging clearly from the water. At high tide, the rock appears smaller. Waves lick higher along the base. The surface of the sea reflects deeper blues. The arching cliffs of the nearby island rise like walls around the bay. The wind picks up, the water grows darker, and Kotapu stands in the middle, leaning slightly as though bowing to the sea. As the tide rises further, waves slap against the stone, creating a resonant sound. It is not the thunderous roar of ocean cliffs. It is softer, steadier, like a heartbeat, a rhythm the rock has known for thousands of years. The rock that watches the tides listens, and in its stillness it remembers. The cliffs surrounding Kotapu are rich with vegetation, jungle spilling over vertical limestone walls. Trees cling to fractures. Vines drape down like green curtains. Birds fly between hidden perches, adding fluttering shadows to the water below. In contrast, Kotapu is bare, a lone figure, a vertical island, a fragment of the earth that refuses to host anything beyond a small crown of greenery. This contrast gives the rock an even stronger sense of solitude. Other formations in the bay rise together, clusters of cliffs forming narrow channels through which boats drift like tiny shadows. But Kotapu stands alone, as though the sea has chosen not to give it neighbours. When storms approach, the mood changes dramatically. Winds push waves farther inland, clouds gather quickly, blanketing the sky in grey. The sea turns restless. Kotapu becomes a dark silhouette against the stormy sky. Its sharp ridges look sharper, its shadows deeper, its presence stronger. Rain hits the water in sheets, waves smash against the rock in white bursts. Boats retreat to safer areas. Thunder echoes across the limestone cliffs, bouncing off their surfaces in deep rolls. But Kotapu does not shake, it does not bend, it does not hide. It stands against the storm the same way it stands against calm. In those moments the rock feels even more alive, almost like a figure defying the sea, meeting each wave with silent patience. When lightning strikes the water nearby, the flash illuminates the rock for a brief moment, a glowing pillar framed by darkness. Photographers have captured such moments rarely, and in each one, Kotapu looks like a guardian watching the sea through the storm. As the weather clears, the water returns to its soft green. Fish return to the shallows. Boats drift closer again. The sun warms the stone, revealing its cracks as silver veins of light. Morning light is gentle on Kotapu. Afternoon light is bright and sharp. Evening light is warm and glowing, and dusk softens the rock into a quiet silhouette against a slowly paling sky. But sunrise is when Kotapu looks the oldest. Mist sometimes drifts above the water like thin scarves. The outline of the rock emerges slowly, its upper edges first, then its body, then its narrow base. The air is cool, birdsong echoes between cliffs, the sea is quiet. Kotapu stands in the dim light like a relic, not of human civilization, but of the Earth's earliest landscapes. When the sun finally crests the horizon, its first rays strike the upper crown of the rock. The leaves of the small shrubs glow, the stone turns amber, the sea brightens with sudden clarity. The rock, that watches the tides, greets the morning without moving, but somehow acknowledging the arrival of a new day. The bay begins to buzz again. Boats leave the shore. Tourists arrive with cameras, marvelling at the rock's shape. Fishermen cast their nets. Children laugh on the beaches of nearby islands. But Kotapu remains unchanged, its ancient patience unbroken. As the day becomes hot, the light becomes harsher, shadows shorten, the water glitters intensely, the cliffs shine with reflected sunlight. Kotapu absorbs the brightness, showing every ridge, every crack, every place where wind and wave have left their mark. In the heat of midday, when the sea breeze softens and the air becomes heavy, the rock appears to shimmer as though floating slightly above the water. Heat bends the light. Waves distort the reflection. The line between stone and sea becomes blurred, and then the tide shifts. The water begins to rise again, quietly, slowly, inevitably. Fish change their movement patterns. Currents pull differently. Boats adjust their positions. Kotapu watches every tide, every cycle, every rise and fall, rhythmically, endlessly. At sunset, the world softens once more. The cliffs turn orange, the sea turns silvery, shadows grow long, birds return to roost, wind fades into gentle breezes. Kotapu stands in the middle of all this, its silhouette outlined in warm light. The top glows, the base darkens, the opening between rock and sea takes on a deeper hue. The entire bay feels like it is breathing quietly, preparing for night. As the sun dips, the sky turns pink, then gold, then deep purple. The rock becomes darker, more mysterious. The sea grows quiet. The world slows. Night arrives fully. Stars appear as faint pinpricks over the silhouettes of cliffs. The water takes on the colour of ink. Birds settle. Insects gather near the mangroves. The air cools. Kotapu becomes a shadow standing against a darker shadow. The only sounds are the slow slaps of water against stone. The only motion is the steady rise and fall of small waves. In the darkness, the rock feels timeless, a monument older than memory, older than stories, older than the tides it watches so faithfully. People come and go, storms come and go, generations come and go, but Kotapu remains, always watching, always listening, always standing in the middle of a quiet, ancient bay where the sea reveals its rhythms through tide and time. And when dawn comes again, as it always does, the rock that watches the tides will greet it in the same stillness, the same patience, the same enduring silence that has defined it for countless ages. Kotapu stands as the sea rises, as the sea falls, as the world turns, as the tides remember. The monolith that knows the deep wind. In the vast high desert of northwestern New Mexico, where the mesas stretch like sleeping giants across the horizon, and the sky arches open in an endless dome of blue, there rises a formation so stark, so isolated, and so monumental that it appears not only older than the land around it, but somehow wiser. The desert winds move across the plains in long, deliberate breaths. Dust spirals upward in thin columns. Shadows drift slowly across volcanic rock. And there, rising more than 400 metres above the flat earth, stands Shiprock, a jagged volcanic monolith whose presence feels less geological and more sentient, as though it has listened to the deep wind for thousands of years and remembers every whisper it carried. To approach Shiprock is to approach silence, not the absence of sound, but the presence of something older than noise. The air grows still, the land grows quieter, even your footsteps seem to soften as you draw near. The monolith dominates the horizon long before you reach it, its serrated edges catching sunlight like ancient blades. Its silhouette stands against the sky, in shapes both sharp and fluid, as though frozen in the middle of rising. The Navajo call it Tsebitai, the winged rock, a name that holds story, flight, transformation, and memory. But in the soft wind that crosses the desert, it is simply the monolith that knows the deep wind, a stone spire shaped not only by volcanic fire, but by countless seasons of breath, storms, dawns, and drifting desert quiet. The closer you come, the more Shiprock changes. What seemed like a single tower becomes a cluster of jagged fins. What looked smooth becomes rough. What looked still begins to hum with the soft resonance of wind passing through narrow gaps in the rock. Even from miles away, you can hear that hum, faint, low, vibrating through the air like the voice of the desert itself. Shiprock is not alone. Trailing from its base are long volcanic dikes, walls of stone stretching for kilometres in straight, impossibly precise lines. These dark ridges cut across the landscape like the spines of buried creatures. They cast long shadows at sunrise and sunset, turning the desert into a world of lines and angles. Walk along these dikes, and the wind changes subtly. The stone walls create corridors where the air compresses, altering its resonance. The wind here speaks differently. Its sound shifts depending on the angle of rock, the time of day, and the temperature of the desert floor. Sometimes it whistles, sometimes it moans, sometimes it falls into a deep, hollow tone that echoes across miles. It is easy to believe Shiprock listens. When you reach the base, the sheer scale becomes overwhelming. The rock face rises almost vertically, a wall of basalt and fractured volcanic material hardened over millions of years. The surface is rough and uneven, pitted with ancient gas pockets and deep cracks. Sections of the stone jut outward like the ribs of continent-sized creatures. The colour ranges from dark brown to deep black, with streaks of rust red and pale gold catching the sun. Place your hand against the rock, and you feel a coolness that seems to come from deep within the earth. Not cold, ancient, not smooth, textured with the memory of eruptions, not static, vibrating faintly with the wind. Shiprock is the remnant of a long dead volcano, the hardened throat left standing after the outer cone eroded away. What remains is the core, the spine, a monolith birthed by fire and preserved by time. At sunrise, the rock glows in colours that change by the minute. First grey, then violet, then deep blue, then warm gold that spreads across its face like a slow sunlit tide. The shadows of the dikes stretch long across the desert. Ravens circle the summit. The air smells faintly of dust and sage. The world feels suspended in a quiet so deep it touches the bones. As the sun climbs higher, heat begins to rise from the desert floor. The air shimmers around the base. Mirage lines twist the horizon. Shiprock does not blur, does not waver. It stands with a solidity that feels impossible in such shifting heat. The deeper the heat grows, the deeper the wind falls. Warm currents rise along the rock face, mixing with cooler currents from shaded cracks. The result is a low, constant, barely audible tone, like breath passing through a hollow instrument. Climbers who approached Shiprock decades ago described the sound as a desert heartbeat, steady and dependable. Locals describe it differently. They say the monolith speaks, not with words but with presence. The desert wind carries messages of storms forming hundreds of miles away, of distant thunder rolling across mesas invisible from this vantage, of shifts in temperature that foretell nightfall. Shiprock seems to know these things first. In the afternoon, when the sun reaches its highest point, the upper ridges of the monolith cast razor-sharp shadows. The cracks turn jet black. The fins glow. The wind grows quieter, as though waiting for the land to cool. The silence deepens into something almost tangible. If you walk along the southern dike, the stone wall rises above you like a spine of dark bone. Its surface is smoother here, shaped by centuries of wind. Climb to the top of the dike, and the desert stretches in every direction, a vast plain broken only by Shiprock's towering form. From this perspective, the monolith feels even more like a sentinel. The wind changes direction without warning, sending soft waves of sand across the ground. These dunes are shallow, shifting constantly. The land remembers the wind more than it remembers footsteps. As evening arrives, the colour of the rock shifts again. The gold fades, red appears, shadows lengthen, the desert cools. Shiprock becomes another shape entirely, a jagged silhouette against a sky of fading light. The dikes glow with the last warmth of the sun, their surfaces turning the colour of embers. A hush settles over the landscape. This is when the deep wind arrives. It comes from high above, descending across the plains with a long, steady push. It is colder. It is older. It carries a tone lower than daytime winds. Shiprock resonates with it. Not loudly, subtly. Not like a flute, like a memory. The stone absorbs the wind, shapes it, sends it down along the dikes in soft, rumbling echoes. You can feel it in your chest if you stand close enough. The monolith hums ever so slightly. Night comes quickly in the desert. The sky fills with stars sharper than anywhere in the cities. The Milky Way leans across the darkness, its light soft against the silhouette of Shiprock. Coyotes call somewhere in the distance. The air cools to a crisp edge. The rock becomes cold enough to shimmer faintly with moonlight. Under the lunar glow, Shiprock looks impossibly ancient, older than the volcanic field around it, older than the stories carved into the land, older than memory itself. The wind continues its slow conversation. The deep wind of night is different, slower, stronger, more certain. It pushes along the monolith's face, whistling through narrow cracks, rushing along edges, swirling in small depressions. Shiprock shapes each gust into something distinct, a different note, a different tone, a different texture of sound. Those who have camped nearby speak of hearing these tones throughout the night. Some say they sound like distant drums. Others hear voices. Most hear nothing more than the desert breathing. But all agree, Shiprock never sleeps. The stone remains awake, listening, remembering, resonating. At dawn, the world grows chilly enough that frost sometimes forms on the shadowed sides of the rock. The first birds call, echoing faintly across the plains. Light appears in a thin band at the horizon. The top of Shiprock turns pale blue, then purple, then rose gold. As the sun rises, the shadows of the dike stretch again, pointing westward. The deep wind retreats. The day wind returns. The monolith warms slowly. By midday, the cycle has begun again. Light, heat, wind, silence, shadow, each passing over the stone like repeating chapters in a story written across millions of years. Yet Shiprock remains unchanged in its presence. It does not move. It does not crumble easily. It does not forget the winds that have shaped it. Climbers who reached the summit long ago described standing on top and feeling a current of air that seemed to rise from within the rock itself, as though the monolith breathed upward, meeting the sky. The air carried a faint scent of mineral dust, cold and dry. Very few have climbed it since. The climb is difficult, forbidden now, too dangerous, too sacred, and perhaps that is fitting. Some stones are meant to be seen, not touched. Some places are meant to be honoured, not conquered. When you walk away from Shiprock, following the dusty roads that lead back toward towns and mesas, the monolith never seems to shrink. Even miles away, it maintains its immense presence, rising above the desert as though reluctant to disappear behind the horizon. You turn back, it still stands. You walk farther, it still rises. Only when you reach the last curve in the land does it finally vanish from view. But even then you feel it behind you, the weight of its silence, the memory of its wind, the echo of its presence. Shiprock remains, listening to the deep wind, as it has for millions of years, as it will for millions more. The desert changes, the sky changes, the world changes, but the monolith remains, a guardian of wind, a witness of time, a spire of volcanic memory rising from the earth, a stone that knows what the deep wind whispers, and will listen long after every other sound has faded. The spine of an ancient mountain. In the deep south of Patagonia, where winds sweep across empty steppes with nothing to slow or soften them, and where glaciers carve the air with cold that seems to remember the Ice Age, there rises a trio of stone towers so stark, so vertical, and so otherworldly that they seem less like mountains and more like the vertebrae of some ancient creature left exposed by time. Snow drifts in high white curls around their summits. Clouds gather in slow, deliberate spirals. Shadows cling to their faces like memories, and standing below them on the shore of a pale glacial lake, you feel as though the world has opened itself into a cathedral built not by hands, but by wind, frost, and stone. These are the Torres del Paine, 3 vast granite pillars, carved by forces older than memory, shaped by ice that retreated long before humans ever walked this land, the spine of an ancient mountain. To approach them is to walk into a landscape shaped by extremes. Patagonian wind howls across the open plains, bending the grass in long silver waves. Guanacos scatter over ridges, moving with soft steps that vanish into the wind. The ground underfoot shifts from soft moss to hard stone, from gravel to muddy glacial runoff. Everything here feels in motion except the towers, the only immovable things in a land of change. From miles away, the Torres rise above the surrounding mountains like the jagged teeth of a colossal creature. They do not slope gently upward like ordinary peaks. They leap, they vault, they stand in sheer vertical slabs, their edges sharp enough to cut the sky. Even before you see them, you feel their presence, a sense of scale that humbles everything around them. As you draw closer, their shape becomes clearer. The north tower rises in a smooth vertical sweep of pale granite. The central tower stands darker, its face more jagged. The south tower curves slightly inward, as though leaning into the wind. They sit side by side yet never touch, separated by narrow shadowed gaps where the wind howls like an old voice trapped between stone. The closer you walk, the colder the air becomes. The wind shifts from a steady push to sudden bursts, gusts that come from nowhere, bending your clothing, pressing against your skin, carrying with them the scent of snow, stone and distant glaciers. Above you, condors ride the air currents, barely moving their wings as they circle the towers in lazy arcs. The approach to the towers passes through forests twisted by wind. Trees here do not grow straight, they bend permanently in the direction the wind always blows, their trunks curved like old men leaning on invisible canes. Their branches twist and split, their bark worn smooth. The forest floor is covered in moss, and small streams that run cold even in summer, carrying meltwater down from higher ridges. Eventually, the forest thins, giving way to boulder fields and loose scree left behind by avalanches that thundered down. The towers long ago. The sound of wind grows louder here. It whistles through cracks. It rattles loose stones. It moans across the slopes. Above the tree line, the world becomes harsh. No shelter, no softness, only rock and sky. Step by step, the towers rise higher. The lake at their base, Laguna Torres, appears suddenly around a bend in the trail. Its water is milky blue from suspended glacial silt. Ice flows sometimes drift along the surface, small and temporary. The lake lies in a basin surrounded by black moraine walls, the debris left behind when the glacier receded centuries ago. And beyond the lake, towering above everything else, the stone spires stand. They rise straight from the earth without preamble, their lower slopes steep and barren, their upper halves sheer and impossible. Snow collects in long vertical streaks along cracks. Ice clings to hidden ledges. From the base, the towers look taller than they do from a distance. Impossibly tall, impossibly thin, impossibly old. The sound of wind hitting their faces echoes across the basin, amplified by the walls. It is a low, continuous roar, like the deep breath of the mountain itself. Sit near the lake's edge and you feel the towers watching you, not with eyes, but with presence, not with judgment, but with memory, not with movement, but with stillness that feels alive. The granite is coarse and pale, flecked with minerals that shimmer faintly when hit by the sun. The stone was born deep underground, hardened by pressure, lifted slowly over eons, carved by ice, and left exposed when glaciers retreated. What you see today is the bare spine of an ancient mountain range, the bones revealed long after the flesh of softer rock eroded away. The wind continues its constant conversation with the towers. It turns corners, it funnels through gaps, it slams into the faces, it lifts snow from ledges and sends it spinning into the air. Snow dust spirals upward, forming ghost-like plumes that drift away from the peaks before dissolving. In winter, storms gather around the towers, smothering them in white. Lightning sometimes strikes their upper ridges, echoing through the basin like distant artillery. The spires stand unmoved. At dawn, the world changes. The first light spills across the horizon in faint stripes of blue and silver. The snow begins to glow. The granite shifts from cold grey to warm pink, then orange, then deep fire gold. This alpen glow is what draws travellers from across the world, the moment the towers catch the first rays of sunlight and ignite with colour. For a few minutes, the entire mountain looks alive, its surface burning with light, its edges sharp and radiant. The reflection in the lake doubles the effect, creating the illusion of towers rising both upward and downward into the earth. Then the sun lifts fully, and the colours fade. The towers return to their familiar pale stone. The wind resumes its steady command. The world becomes cold again. Climbers who have scaled the towers describe the ascent as both beautiful and terrifying. The granite is rough and unforgiving. The vertical faces offer few rests. Storms sweep in without warning. Ice forms in cracks even in summer, but they also describe moments of profound silence at small ledges halfway up. Silence so deep it feels like listening to the breath of the world. From those heights, the wind changes character. It does not roar. It whispers, thin, cold, ancient. They say the stone vibrates slightly with the force of the wind, not enough to frighten, but enough to remind them that the mountain interacts constantly with the air around it. The towers do not simply endure the wind, they shape it. Walk along the moraine wall, and you hear the wind funneling between the central and north towers like air moving through a giant flute. The pitch changes depending on the strength of the gust. Sometimes it is high, sharp, whistling. Sometimes it is low, muted, moaning like an animal in deep sleep. The spine of an ancient mountain translates the wind into sound. By afternoon, clouds often form around the summits. They cling to the edges, swirling in slow loops. Shadows fall across the lake. Light breaks in scattered beams through gaps in the cloud. Occasionally, the towers vanish entirely behind mist, then reappear in sudden clarity. Watching this cycle unfold, you sense the patience of stone compared to the restlessness of weather. The towers do not resist the clouds. They do not resist the wind. They simply exist, unchanged, unmoved. Evening brings a deeper calm. The light softens into blue. The wind quiets. The basin cools rapidly. Ice begins to form along the lake's edges. Shadows climb the towers from the bottom upward. As the sun sinks, the towers become silhouettes against the sky turning wine red and copper. Their outlines become sharper as the last light touches their summits before vanishing into night. Night in Patagonia is long and cold. Stars appear in fierce clarity. The Milky Way arches over the basin. The lake reflects it faintly. Frost gathers on rocks and shrubs. In this darkness the towers appear larger, their edges blending into the sky. The wind returns in long, steady breaths that echo across the moraine. The rock faces catch the faintest traces of starlight, giving them an almost metallic sheen. Some travellers who camp near the lake describe hearing faint cracks in the night, the sound of ice shifting, stone cooling, cliffs adjusting to temperature changes. These sounds echo sharply, amplified by the basin. Others describe the wind as carrying a low hum, rising and falling as though the towers themselves were speaking in a language made of air and time. The spires do not change shape overnight, but the world around them changes constantly. Temperatures rising and falling, clouds forming and dissolving, water freezing and melting. Even the stars move overhead, shifting in long arcs, but the towers remain. At dawn, the cycle begins again. Cold air, indigo sky, first light, the glow of rising sun, the awakening of the stone. And if you walk away from the lake, following the long trails that wind down into the valley, the towers remain visible for hours. Their shapes dominate the landscape even as forests return, even as rivers cut through the terrain, even as wildlife appears again among grasses and shrubs. Only when the land finally bends, hiding the skyline behind a ridge, do the towers disappear, but even unseen, their presence lingers, in the wind that still carries their sound, in the cold air that remembers the glaciers, in the stone beneath your feet, distant cousins to the granite spires, in the memory of their impossible vertical rise. Torres del Paine remain, the exposed spine of an ancient mountain, the bones of a world shaped by ice, the pillars of a cathedral built by time. They stand against storms, they stand against centuries, they stand against the endless push of wind, and they will stand long after the forests shift, long after the glaciers recede further, long after generations of travellers come and go. The towers endure not because they resist the world, but because they belong to it so completely. The spine of an ancient mountain remains, silent, immovable, patient, and old beyond understanding. The stone that shadows itself along the humid coastline of Rio de Janeiro, where rainforest drapes itself over steep hills and the Atlantic breathes in slow, salt-scented waves, there rises a mountain of stone so massive, so abrupt in its ascent, and so marked by strange shadows that it feels less like part of the landscape and more like a guardian positioned deliberately between forest and sea. Clouds cling to its summit in swirling bands. Vines trail down its flanks. Birds trace circles in warm thermals around its ridges. And every evening, as the sun sinks behind the hills, the mountain casts a dark shape upon itself, a shadow drawn across its own stone face, as though the mountain is remembering something older than the forest below it. This is Pedra de Gavia, a vast monolith of granite and gneiss, rising sharply from the coastline, its cliffs steep, its presence immense, its silhouette unmistakable even from miles away, the stone that shadows itself. From the beaches far below, Pedra de Gavia appears like a colossal face, lips, chin, forehead, carved naturally over time by wind, rain, heat, and the slow work of erosion. But the illusion is powerful, and for centuries people have pointed to the shape and wondered if the mountain once bore meaning beyond simple geology. To approach Pedra de Gavia is to feel its scale long before you reach it. The air grows still beneath its shadow, the trees become quieter, the calls of birds echo differently, the humidity thickens, carrying the earthy scent of wet soil and leaves. The trail begins in dense Atlantic forest, a world of vines, roots, mossy trunks, and filtered sunlight that falls in green gold shafts. As you walk, the soundscape of the forest surrounds you, the call of tinnitus hidden in underbrush, the hum of insects, the rustle of distant monkeys leaping through branches high above. Every now and then, a gust of wind moves across the canopy, sending a gentle wave through leaves like the surface of a living sea. The forest rises steadily, the path winding upward between boulders and thick roots. The higher you go, the more the mountain reveals its mood, humid, ancient, unhurried. Ferns grow in thick clusters, bromeliads cling to trees, moss spreads across exposed stone like green velvet, water trickles down small rock faces, gathering into tiny streams that vanish under the undergrowth. Eventually, the sound of the ocean fades behind you, the world becomes a maze of stone and leaf, and then, suddenly, the trees open. A sheer wall of Pedra de Gavia's lower cliff towers above you, a massive expanse of grey and gold-flecked stone rising almost vertically into the sky. The surface is rough and cracked, streaked by water and centuries of heat. It glimmers in places where mica catches the light. Standing at its base, you feel the immensity of the monolith not as a shape, but as a pressure, the weight of millions of years pressing down in silence. Climbers who scale this face speak of its warmth, its coarseness, the faint hum of wind brushing across it. The stone holds the memory of sunlight deep within, radiating it back slowly. Handholds and ledges appear unexpectedly. Cracks widen. Some surfaces are polished, smooth by rain, but most approach the summit by winding paths that move through forest and open slopes. The path grows steeper, the canopy thins, light becomes stronger, rocks scatter across the ground, and the wind begins to move differently, sharper, cooler, carrying with it the salt of the Atlantic. As you climb, the mountain begins to reveal its other face. A ridge rises toward the summit, narrow in places, wide in others. The forest gives way to exposed stone. Birds soar in wide circles, riding invisible currents rising from the heated rock. The air opens into wide blue sky. Near the top, the slope becomes almost sheer. Climbers call it the Carrasquera, a steep rock wall where hands and feet must work together. The stone here is rough, pitted, marked by countless weathering cycles. Ascending it is slow, deliberate, rhythmic, the pace of interacting with a mountain that does not rush. Once past the Carrasquera, the summit opens into a wide plateau. The world spreads out beneath you. The Atlantic stretches to the horizon in a broad, shimmering arc. City neighbourhoods cluster near the coastline like islands of colour. Forests ripple across the hills like living blankets of green. Other mountains rise nearby, Dois Irmãos, Corcovado, Pico da Tijuca, but none reach quite as abruptly or as boldly as Pedra da Gavia. Up here, the wind is constant. It moves across the summit in long, unbroken streams. It cools the skin. It carries the calls of soaring vultures and hawks. It whips through cracks in the stone, singing low tones that drift across the plateau. Turn toward the cliff edge, and you see the shape that inspired centuries of whispers, the profile of a face carved naturally into the rock. Even from this high vantage, the features are difficult to see. They are clearer from the sea, where the mountain's profile aligns with imagination. But up close, the stone feels alive, the curves and ridges shaped by erosion, but carrying the weight of meaning. Walk across the summit, and the terrain shifts from flat slabs of granite to deep fissures and depressions filled with vegetation. Some cracks plunge downward like narrow canyons. Others are shallow and wide. The stone surface is rough, textured, broken by veins of darker mineral, and in the late afternoon, the mountain begins to shadow itself. As the sun lowers behind the distant Serra dos Órgãos, the angle of light shifts across Pedra da Gavia's massive face. The cliffs catch the sun at one moment, then fall into shadow the next. The profile of the mountain becomes a silhouette of its own features. The shadow deepens across the central fissures. The face darkens. The lines become sharper. It is as though the mountain withdraws into itself. A stone remembering its own form. A monument cloaking itself in silence. A strange hush falls across the summit at this hour. Birds quiet. Wind softens. The world grows blue. The sun continues its descent. Shadows stretch. The cliffs fade into silhouette. The stone cools. Night approaches fast in the tropics. Colours vanish from the landscape. Lights appear along the coastline far below. The city hums quietly in the distance, but the mountain remains dark, massive, still, its summit cooling in deep breaths, its face hidden in its own shadow, its presence unchanged. Those who have camped near the top describe nights filled with strange sounds. Not creatures, though the forest below teems with life. Not people, though distant voices drift faintly from trails. But the mountain itself, contracting as it cools, producing soft cracks, distant thuds, and low groans as temperature shifts cause the stone to adjust. The wind also returns at night, moving across the summit with a lower pitch. It whistles through cracks, it rustles through patches of grass, it hums along the cliff edge. Sometimes the wind rises suddenly, a gust that lasts only seconds, followed by perfect stillness. In that stillness the mountain feels ancient in a way that daylight does not reveal. When dawn approaches, the sky begins to glow faintly. The horizon brightens from deep navy to pale blue. Clouds drift low along the ocean's surface. The summit of Pedra da Gavia becomes a silhouette. Slowly, the first rays of sunlight strike the uppermost ridges. The stone turns gold. The forest below, ripples with morning movement. Birds rise into the air, their wings catching the new light. Wind shifts direction, humidity returns. The stone that shadows itself steps out of its own darkness. As the sun climbs higher, the summit warms. The face on the mountain brightens. The cracks glisten with moisture evaporating from the night. The wind begins its daily dance across the cliffs. From certain angles, the profile reappears. The suggestion of a brow, the line of a jaw, the ridge of a nose. It is a trick of geology, of erosion, of human imagination, but also a testament to how the stone invites stories. Travellers who descend the mountain often pause at the lower cliffs to look back. The face becomes clearer from below, its angles more dramatic, its shadows more precise, and when clouds drift across the sky, the entire formation shifts expression, stern under harsh sun, thoughtful under cloud cover, mysterious in the half-light of dusk. Pedra de Gavia is never the same shape twice. Light reshapes it, wind reshapes it, shadow reshapes it. It is a mountain that sculpts itself continuously. As you walk back through the forest, humidity gathers once more. Mist rises from the ground. The sound of insects grows louder. The distant noise of waves returns. But even far below, even hidden by trees, the presence of Pedra de Gavia lingers, a weight in the horizon, a memory in the sky, a silhouette in the mind. From the beach, the mountain stands like a giant reclining at the coastline, its face carved by time, its summit cloaked in cloud. Each afternoon, when the sun leans westward, it shadows itself again, the profile darkening, the cliffs dimming, the stone withdrawing into its own contours. Pedra de Gavia is less a mountain than a presence, a guardian of forest and shore, a cliff carved by ages, a stone shaped by memory and myth, a monolith that carries its own shadow with it, day after day, year after year, century after century, and long after every light of the city dims, long after the forest shifts and grows, long after new stories take the place of old ones, the mountain will remain, watching the Atlantic, listening to the wind, casting its shadow across its own face. The stone that shadows itself endures, quiet, immovable, ancient, and alive in the ways that only mountains can be. The needle that points at nowhere. In the sprawling quiet of canyonlands, where desert light settles onto stone like dust, and the wind moves across open mazes in long, unhurried breaths, there rises a forest of sandstone towers, so strange and so still that they feel like the last remnants of a world that once stood taller and spoke in different shapes. The land spreads outward in wide terraces and broken ridges. Shadows fall into deep crevices. The sky expands above like an old pale bowl of endless blue. And among these layered cliffs and open valleys stand the needles, thin, towering monoliths of striped red and white stone that seem to point in every direction and none at all. One of these spires stands slightly apart from the rest, isolated, narrow, rising from a pedestal of eroded rock like the tip of a stone spear. Locals sometimes call it nothing more than another formation, just one among many. But to travellers who walk through this labyrinth of stone, it becomes a figure with its own personality, a solitary needle pointed upward, yet directed toward nowhere in particular. The needle that points at nowhere. To reach it, you move across a desert that feels both vast and intimate. The ground shifts from slick rock to sand, to small fields of cryptobiotic soil, fragile, dark crusts alive with microorganisms. Sagebrush grows low to the ground, carrying the dry scent of desert rain. Ravens trace spirals overhead, their calls echoing loudly in the open air. The dry heat of midday gives way to cooler breezes as the day deepens. At first, the landscape appears flat and plain. Distant cliffs, some mesas, a scattering of junipers twisted by wind. But the deeper you walk, the more the terrain reveals itself in layers. Hidden canyons, winding dry washes, narrow slots carved by ancient floods, terraces lined with smooth stone laid down millions of years ago. The needles rise suddenly beyond one of these terraces. Tall, thin spires stretching upward like a petrified forest. Their striped layers form natural patterns, rust-red bands of ancient iron-rich sediment, pale sandstone bleached by time, darker tones where desert varnish has built up over centuries. And in the middle of them stands the needle, a column scarcely wider than a few dozen feet at its base, narrowing as it rises, tapering into an uneven point touched constantly by wind and sky. Approaching it, you feel something subtle shift in the air. The desert grows quieter. The wind slows. Heat radiates from the stone. The silence becomes more complete, a kind of listening silence. The spire stands alone on a platform of eroded sandstone, its base surrounded by scattered rocks and fragments fallen from its own slow erosion. Cracks run upward in long strides. Vertical grooves hold shadows even in bright light. The stone surface is warm to the touch, rough in texture, speckled with grains shaped by ages of storms. The needle seems impossibly tall compared to its width, a statement of improbable balance, a defiance of time, but geological history shaped it naturally. Layers of rock once buried deep underground, lifted by tectonic movement, carved by water that no longer flows here, sculpted by wind that still moves with purpose across this desert, stand at its base and you feel tiny beneath it. Look upward and the tip disappears against the bright sky. Yet the needle does not aim toward any peak or star or horizon. It simply points, not toward guidance, not toward meaning, but toward the emptiness above. The desert does not explain itself. Walk around the spire and its form shifts subtly. From one side it appears like a thin blade. From another it looks thicker, almost solid. From another it seems to lean slightly. And from the last it becomes a perfect vertical line. The shifting perspective makes it clear why so many explorers feel as though the stone is watching them, not with eyes, but with its presence, its shifting silhouette, its constant redefinition. The wind moves differently around the needle. It splits around the stone, creating small, swirling eddies. It hums faintly along narrow grooves. It carries grains of sand that tap softly against the rock. If you stand still enough, you can hear the wind create a tone. Low, hollow, fleeting. The desert's voice, caught briefly in stone. Around the spire lies a maze of smaller formations, squat pillars, eroded domes, arches worn by water and wind. The ground becomes uneven. Layers of rock peel away from the cliffs like old pages curled by heat. In certain light, the entire landscape glows, orange, red, rose, gold, depending on the hour. At midday, the sun beats down with fierce clarity. Shadows disappear. The needle becomes stark, a bright, narrow column set against an impossibly blue sky. Heat waves shimmer around it. Lizards dart across hot stone. The air smells faintly of dust and hot earth. And yet, despite the heat, the spire remains cool in deep cracks, warm only on its surface, a reminder of how stone holds time differently from the rest of the world. By afternoon, clouds form occasionally in distant skies. They drift slowly across the desert, casting moving shadows that slide across the towers. When one passes over the needle, the stone dims slightly, and its colours soften. This moment, when bright stone meets soft clouded light, makes the spire appear almost weightless, as though it might lift from the earth and continue its pointing toward the sky. The surrounding canyon walls catch echoes easily. Even a quiet footstep bounces off the stone. A single bird call multiplies into several. Wind becomes multiple voices. The desert communicates in reflection, not volume. Walking farther, you find small alcoves carved into cliff walls, places where ancient peoples once sheltered, leaving behind traces, rock spalls, bits of pigment, petroglyphs etched carefully into sandstone. These faint etchings often include shapes resembling towers, spires, and narrow vertical lines. Perhaps the needles were landmarks even then. Perhaps the spire guided wandering groups across the plateau. Or perhaps it was simply another presence to acknowledge, a silent figure belonging only to the desert. Climbers who have approached the spire often describe a feeling of reluctance. Not fear, but hesitation. The stone feels too still, too ancient, too complete. The desert does not encourage disturbance. It offers the spire as a witness, not a challenge. In the late afternoon, the light changes again. The sun lowers toward distant mesas. Shadows stretch across the sand. The needle casts a long, thin shadow that extends far across the ground, a delicate elongated form that emphasizes the spire's slender shape. For a brief moment, the shadow touches other formations. Then it moves on, then it lengthens further, then it dissolves as the sun dips lower. At sunset, the entire landscape becomes an array of glowing colour. The sandstone towers ignite in red, the spire glows orange, the desert floor becomes a warm brown gold. The sky shifts from silver blue to rose, then violet, then deepening indigo. The needle stands transformed, no longer a stark column, but a blade of violet stone rising from a basin of quiet shadow. Silence deepens, wind softens, shadows cool. The temperature drops rapidly. Night arrives in stages. Blue, then deeper blue, then black speckled, slowly with stars. The desert becomes cold and vast. Crickets chirp softly in hidden places. The towers turn to silhouettes. The needle becomes a thin line against the sky. Under starlight, the spire feels older than it does at any other time. The darkness removes details. The mind fills in shapes. The desert breathes quietly. The wind returns in long, slow drafts. It enters the canyon with a soft rush. It moves across the spire without sound. It carries the cold scent of nighttime stone. Some travellers who camp nearby say the needle seems taller in darkness. Others say it leans differently. A few describe a faint glow, not of the stone itself, but of starlight collected along its edges. In this darkness, the spire does not point at the sky. It points into emptiness, the vast nowhere above. And yet, in that nowhere, the stars appear. Constellations shift slowly overhead. The moon rises late, coating the spire in pale silver. The entire landscape becomes a dream of stone and sky. By dawn, the desert chills sharply. A thin band of light appears at the horizon. The needle becomes a silhouette once more, sharp, narrow, solitary. The first rays of sunlight touch its tip. It brightens faintly. Its colours return. The desert awakens. Slowly, the spire steps back into day. The wind changes. Birds begin their morning calls. Shadows retreat. Heat gathers. The needle is pointed upward through another night, another cycle of darkness and dawn, another passage of quiet desert time. From afar, as you walk away toward other trails, the spire fades gradually into the forest of stone around it. Its uniqueness softens. Its shape blends with others. Its presence becomes part of the canyon's larger silence. Only when you look back one last time does it stand alone again. Tall, thin, patient, a stone finger pointing not toward meaning or direction or intention, but toward the wide emptiness above the desert. The needle that points at nowhere endures, in silence, in light, in shadow, in wind, in the ancient slow-moving time of stone. Thank you for wandering with us through these silent stones and the mysteries they keep. If you enjoyed this journey, please like, subscribe, and share where you're watching from. Until our next unearthed secret, may the ancient places rest quietly in your mind.